She never raised her voice. Not once, in 3 years. She never insulted him. She never even seemed angry. And yet, by the time he finally left that relationship, he could not remember the last time he had trusted his own judgment about anything. No bruises, no shouting matches, no dramatic scenes his friends could point to and say, "That's the problem." Right there. Just a slow, quiet erosion of everything he used to believe about himself, day after day, month after month, until the version of him that used to trust his own judgment felt like someone he had read about once, not someone he actually remembered being. And the person doing it to him was, by every outward appearance, one of the most agreeable, likable, low-key people anyone had ever met. The kind of person other people described, without hesitation, as one of the good ones. This is the story of the covert narcissist, not the loud, obvious kind everyone already knows how to spot. The quiet kind. The kind that hides in plain sight, wrapped in humility, wrapped in shyness, wrapped in what looks, from the outside, like sensitivity. And by the time most people realize what they are actually dealing with, they have already spent years questioning their own sanity instead. Here is the question that should genuinely disturb you. What if the most dangerous person in your life is not the one who screams the loudest, but the one everyone else describes as so sweet? Stick with this, because by the end, you are going to recognize patterns you have almost certainly lived through and never had the right words for until now. Most people think they know what narcissism looks like: loud, arrogant, obsessed with attention, bragging at every dinner party, demanding to be the center of every room. That version is real, and it is easy to spot, which is exactly why it is not the dangerous one. The dangerous version is the opposite. Quiet, modest-sounding, almost painfully humble, at least on the surface. Psychologists call this the covert narcissist, and it is one of the most underdiagnosed, misunderstood personality patterns in modern psychology, precisely because it does not look anything like what the word narcissist makes you imagine. So what does it actually look like? It starts with something so ordinary you would never suspect it. Constant, quiet victimhood. A covert narcissist is almost always the hero of a tragedy only they can see. Every job that did not work out was because a jealous boss sabotaged them. Every friendship that ended was because the friend simply could not handle how deeply they felt things. Every relationship that fell apart was because their partner was too demanding, too cold, too much. Listen closely enough, over months, over years, and you will notice something unsettling. In their version of their own life, they are never, not once, the reason anything went wrong. That alone would just be frustrating. It becomes dangerous when you realize what comes next. Because if they are never the problem, then eventually, in every conflict you ever have with them, you become the problem instead. And this is where the real damage begins, in a process psychologists call gaslighting. Though the covert narcissist rarely does it the way movies show it. There is no dramatic denial, no shouting that never happened. It is quieter than that, and somehow far more effective. It sounds like this. You bring up something that hurt you, calmly, reasonably, and instead of a direct answer, you get a sigh, a hurt expression, a quiet comment about how sensitive you have become lately, how you always seem to be looking for something to be upset about. Within minutes, somehow, you are the one apologizing. You are the one who feels guilty. You walked into that conversation certain about what happened. You walk out of it unsure whether you even have the right to feel hurt at all. That specific feeling, that quiet erosion of your own certainty about your own experience, is the signature of covert narcissistic abuse, and almost everyone who has lived through it describes the exact same confusion. Here's what makes this pattern so much harder to identify than the loud version. A loud narcissist makes enemies quickly, because their behavior is obvious to everyone watching. A covert narcissist makes almost no enemies at all, because their cruelty is nearly invisible to anyone who is not the actual target. Friends describe them as sweet. Family describes them as sensitive, maybe a little shy, but kind-hearted. Co-workers barely notice them, which is exactly the point. The damage happens in private, one-on-one, where there are no witnesses, and where the covert narcissist has complete control over how the story gets told afterward. This raises an uncomfortable question. If they seem so harmless to everyone else, how do you know if you are actually dealing with one, or if you are simply overreacting to a partner, a parent, or a friend who happens to be a little insecure? The difference lies in a pattern, not a single moment, and once you see the pattern clearly, you cannot unsee it. The first sign is what psychologists call fragile grandiosity. Underneath the humble surface, a covert narcissist secretly believes they are more sensitive, more misunderstood, more deserving than everyone around them, even while constantly insisting they want nothing, need nothing, expect nothing. It sounds like modesty. It is actually a quiet, private conviction of superiority that never gets spoken directly, only implied, again and again, through subtle comparisons and constant, quiet disappointment in everyone around them for failing to appreciate how special they secretly believe themselves to be. The second sign is chronic, invisible scorekeeping. Every kindness they show you gets remembered, catalogued, and eventually cashed in, usually during an argument that seems to have nothing to do with it. Remember when I drove you to the airport at 5 in the morning? Remember when I supported you through that terrible year? These moments resurface not as memories of love, but as leverage, weapons stored quietly for exactly the right moment to make you feel like you owe them something you can never fully repay. The third sign, and this is the one most people miss entirely, is a strange allergy to accountability disguised as extreme self-criticism. This one confuses almost everyone because it looks like the opposite of narcissism. A covert narcissist will sometimes seem harshly self-critical, even self-loathing, saying things like, "I know I'm the worst, I always ruin everything, nobody could ever really love someone like me." It sounds like humility. It is often a trap, because the moment you try to comfort them, reassure them, tell them they are not actually the worst, the conversation quietly shifts away from whatever they actually did wrong, and you end up comforting the person who just hurt you, while the thing they did gets quietly forgotten. Think about how effective that is for a moment. It means every single confrontation, no matter how justified, somehow ends with you managing their emotions instead of addressing your own. You came into the conversation hurt. You leave the conversation exhausted, reassuring someone else, wondering how the entire dynamic flipped so completely and so fast. The fourth sign is subtle isolation, and this is the one that should genuinely alarm you if you recognize it. Covert narcissists rarely demand isolation directly. They do not forbid you from seeing friends or family, because that would be too obvious, too easy to name later. Instead, it happens through a slow accumulation of quiet discouragement. A skeptical comment about a friend's motives, a hurt reaction whenever you make plans without them. A pattern of becoming subtly unwell, emotionally or even physically, right around the times you are supposed to be somewhere else. Over months and years, without ever issuing a single direct order, your world quietly shrinks down to the size of their comfort zone, and you barely notice it happening until the people who used to check in on you have simply stopped, worn down by how hard it became to reach you. Years later, when you finally look up and count who is still there, the number is often shockingly small, and almost nobody can pinpoint the exact moment it happened, because there was no single moment. There were 1,000 tiny ones, none large enough to notice on its own. Picture a fairly ordinary scene, the kind that plays out in relationships everywhere without anyone realizing what it actually is. A woman mentions, gently, that she felt hurt when her partner cancelled plans with her for the third time that month. She is calm. She is not accusing him of anything. She simply wants to talk about how it made her feel. Within 30 seconds, the conversation is no longer about the cancelled plans at all. It is about how exhausted he has been lately, how nobody understands the pressure he is under, how hurtful it is that she would bring this up right now, of all times, when he is already struggling so much. By the end of the conversation, she is the one comforting him, promising to be more understanding, quietly wondering if she really was being too demanding after all. The cancelled plans were never actually addressed. They simply vanished, replaced by a performance of suffering so convincing that even she forgot, for a moment, what she originally walked in to say. This is not an isolated incident. It is a pattern, repeated so many times over months and years that eventually the woman in this story stops bringing things up at all. Not because the problem stopped happening, because she learned, slowly and painfully, that raising them always seemed to cost her more than staying quiet ever did. This is precisely how covert narcissistic relationships train the people inside them to disappear, one small, reasonable, unaddressed complaint at a time. Contrast that with a healthy relationship for a moment, because the difference is worth naming clearly. In a healthy dynamic, when one person says, "That hurt me," the other person, even if they feel defensive at first, eventually circles back to the actual issue. They apologize. They adjust their behavior, at least some of the time. The relationship bends toward repair. In a covert narcissistic dynamic, the same complaint gets absorbed, deflected, and quietly turned into evidence of your own unreasonableness again and again, until repair stops being the goal entirely and simply avoiding conflict becomes the only realistic outcome anyone is aiming for. By now, a disturbing pattern should be forming in your mind, but there is a twist here that psychologists find especially important, and it might explain why you or someone you love ended up in this dynamic in the first place. Covert narcissists do not typically target people who are naive or weak. They tend to target people who are unusually empathetic, unusually loyal, unusually willing to give others the benefit of the doubt. That instinct, generosity of spirit, the willingness to assume good intent, is exactly what makes a person vulnerable to this specific kind of manipulation. It is a strange, cruel irony. The very qualities that make someone a genuinely good partner, a good friend, a good listener, are the same qualities a covert narcissist quietly learns to exploit again and again, without the other person ever realizing their kindness was being used against them. If a covert narcissist never raises their voice, never explodes, never does anything dramatic enough to point to, how does anyone ever actually get free? The answer, according to psychologists who study this pattern closely, starts with something deceptively simple. You have to stop looking for a single dramatic moment to justify leaving, because it is rarely coming. What you are looking for instead is the accumulated weight of 1,000 small moments, each one small enough to explain away individually, but devastating when you finally see them stacked together. This is exactly why so many people stay in these dynamics for years, sometimes decades, long after friends and family gently start asking if everything is really okay. Because from the outside, there is no single incident that justifies the exhaustion everyone can see on your face. And from the inside, you have been so carefully, quietly convinced that any complaint you raise makes you the difficult one, that you stop trusting your own read on the situation entirely. This is the real, lasting damage of covert narcissistic relationships. It is not a single wound. It is the slow, patient dismantling of your own confidence in what you know to be true. Recovery, according to the people who study this, and the people who have lived through it, tends to start the same way almost every single time. It starts with one small, private moment where a person finally, quietly admits to themselves, "This is not normal," not screaming it, not announcing it to anyone, just a small, internal recognition, often triggered by hearing someone else describe their own story out loud and realizing, with a jolt, that it sounds exactly like yours. From there, the work becomes about rebuilding something the relationship slowly took away. Trust in your own perception. Therapists who specialize in this kind of recovery often start by asking clients to simply write down what actually happened in a given conversation, in plain, factual language, before any self-doubt gets added on top of it. Over time, this rebuilds a muscle that atrophied during the relationship, the basic, foundational ability to trust what you saw with your own eyes and heard with your own ears, without needing someone else's permission to believe it. Some describe it as learning a language they used to speak fluently as children, before years of quiet correction taught them to doubt every word. Here is something that surprises almost everyone who goes through this process. The anger usually comes later, not first. First comes grief, a strange, disorienting grief for the version of the relationship you thought you were in, and for the years spent trying to fix something you were never actually allowed to name. Only after that grief settles does the anger arrive, and psychologists generally see this as a healthy, necessary sign. Proof that the fog is finally lifting. Proof that the person is finally able to see the pattern clearly enough to be angry about it at all. That anger, uncomfortable as it feels, is usually the first sign of real strength returning, not the loss of it. There is one more twist to this story that almost nobody expects, and it might be the most important part. Covert narcissism does not usually appear out of nowhere. Psychologists who study its origins point again and again to childhood, specifically to children who were either excessively praised for being special without earning it, or children who were quietly neglected, and learned that the only way to get attention was to perform fragility, sensitivity, or specialness convincingly enough that someone, anyone, would finally pay attention. This does not excuse the damage they cause as adults. It does explain why the pattern feels so deeply, stubbornly rooted, and why it rarely responds to simple conversations, ultimatums, or good intentions alone. Understanding where it came from is not the same as forgiving what it became, and psychologists are careful to draw that line clearly, because compassion for someone's history is not the same thing as accepting responsibility for repairing them. This is also why experts are almost universally clear about one thing. You cannot fix a covert narcissist by loving them harder, understanding them more deeply, or finally finding the right words to make them see what they are doing. The pattern was built over decades, often before the person could even talk, and it very rarely unravels because someone close to them tried hard enough. The only person whose behavior you can actually change in this story is your own, specifically, your own willingness to keep staying in a dynamic that keeps costing you your confidence, your friendships, and your own sense of what is real. So here is what to actually watch for, in plain terms, starting today. Notice how you feel after spending time with someone, not just what they said. Do you consistently leave conversations more confused about your own feelings than when you walked in? Do you find yourself constantly apologizing for things that, when you say them out loud to a friend, do not actually sound like your fault at all? Do the people who love you seem to be quietly, gradually disappearing from your life, without any single dramatic reason why? These questions matter more than any single checklist, because covert narcissism was never designed to be caught by a checklist. It was designed to be invisible, and the only real defense against something invisible is learning, slowly and deliberately, to trust the discomfort you already feel, instead of explaining it away one more time. Here is something deep worth sitting with long after this video ends. The most dangerous kind of harm is rarely the kind that leaves a mark someone else can see. It is the kind that quietly convinces you the mark does not exist at all, that you imagined it, that you are simply too sensitive, too demanding, too much. If any part of what you just heard felt uncomfortably familiar, ask yourself honestly, whose voice have you been hearing in your head every time you doubt your own experience? And is that voice actually yours, or is it a voice you were quietly taught to believe was your own? If this helped you see a pattern more clearly, share it with someone who might need these exact words today. And stay close, because the next story goes even deeper into the hidden patterns that quietly shape the people closest to us.